Dear learners, welcome back to another session on Research Methodology for Tourism and Hospitality Management course. I hope this course will be useful for all the learners who are at different levels of their education. Undergraduate, postgraduate and PhD scholars will greatly benefit by the content which I would be sharing with you. In second unit, we have seen different techniques for qualitative research. If I recap what we have studied in the last few modules, we studied phenomenology, ethnography, case study, grounded theory, symbolic interactions, semiotics in the last 2-3 modules. Today we are going to cover the following topics. The first topic that we will be covering today will be how to design qualitative studies. And the end of the session, you will have an idea about the contribution of qualitative inquiry in tourism and hospitality researches. Let us start. The topics that you look in this slide is taken from the book of U. Flick. So when we are studying research methodology, one of the key challenge for us is to develop a dissertation or to develop a research proposal. By using qualitative research techniques, U. Flick gives us some points to consider when you are making a research design. And the number one is goals of the study. Students, when you are making a dissertation for your undergraduate level or postgraduate level, you come across a lot of challenge. The first thing is time constraint. In a semester, there are very less number of working days, or you may also have other assignments to complete. So the goals of the research, if it is a dissertation, you have to set your objectives and your research design accordingly. And if it is a case of a PhD research, you can do more field work in comparison to an undergraduate student. And if it is a research project which lasts for a couple of years, the research team, they can set the goals accordingly. So the first point that you have to remember here is your goals should be specific and clear in your mind. The second aspect is what you are going to study through your research. If the purpose is to uncover social issues, then accordingly you have to set your research design. It may take more time, it may involve participation of respondents, and you have to delve into the research area yourself. The second point here we note is research questions. The research questions are very important part of a dissertation. So what do you want to study? The questions normally start with how, why, two keywords that we find, and addressing these two questions, WH or how questions, is one of the major purpose of your study. So one important point is the context. The context of the study play a very important role. Let us take a practical example. So when we frame questions, why a particular phenomena is very important, or how the local community is coping up with over tourism, such kind of examples we can take. So the research questions here specifically go into the research area. From research questions, you develop your research objectives. The available resources are very important, because if you are a student, you may not have sufficient money, you may not have sufficient time, or you cannot reach out to many people. So it is very important that you have to assess your resources. For a PG dissertation or a UG dissertation, the primary purpose is to get your thesis awarded and score marks. When it comes into a PhD, you may be discovering new topics, or you may emphasize upon an existing theory, how it is applicable in the field. So, pay attention to research question. This is another important point suggested by U. Flick. And the third point to remember is generalization. Generalization is one of the major purpose of any research. So, when we look into the context, you may find something interesting. How that interesting study outcomes can be generalized across the world or in different contexts. That is the question. So, again, in the case of a UG dissertation or a PG dissertation, this would be not possible. Reason is the semester wise, the requirement for the course, or the student may be in a hurry to complete the dissertation or thesis. But let us take a PhD or a project. Many studies are conducted at a local level, but the outcomes are generalized in the global way. The context could be local, but the outcomes can be generalized in other countries or different part of the world. If your research outcomes are discussed widely, cited in different countries, your research is going to contribute to the academic community in a greater way. Another important point is comparison. Whether your research objective is to compare phenomena or compare different scenarios, this also you have to consider. And the fourth point is the degree of standard and the control that you want to exercise. So, what benchmark your institution is set, or what are the standards that you want to maintain with your work. So, here for every institution they have set guidelines, and at a national level UGC give common guidelines which could be followed by different universities. So, an undergraduate student want to take a project which describes certain phenomena and ends with some conclusions. A postgraduate student go little more detail into that phenomena and try to come out with recommendations and conclusions. Whereas a PhD scholar address certain issues and the outcomes could be highly useful for the community or the nation itself. So, here generalization play an important role. And the second aspect is control. Control, I mean to say, as a researcher, what extent you are able to follow the guidelines and achieve the benchmarks established by your organization. And second is, what extent you have control over your work at different stages. I mean to say, when you do review of literature, do you have access to good journals? Do you have access to thesis, whether it is physically or online? So, access to resources is a very important part of any kind of research. And second, when you work, the results which you have, what extent it matches with your expectations, and what extent the outcomes are contributing to the academic world. So, control factors play in either way. The last part is resources available at your end. I already mentioned that whatever resources that you have to utilize for your dissertation. Just imagine, if you don't have access to internet, then you cannot download any material available online. If your library is not equipped with good journals, or the dissertations are not available at your library, then naturally a student face difficulty. So again, let us take different context and also the need of the study. Here, for PhD scholars, a scholar has to travel extensively to libraries or refer online depositories and journal collections so that they can compile the information. Then second question comes money, whether you have enough money to travel for field work, or you have enough money to spend for data collection, or in the form of doing analysis like buying necessary softwares for your work. So all this matters. So qualitative research design is simple, but at the same time it needs your involvement, and right away it starts from setting your research goals, and second is research questions, and the purpose is to generalize or compare a scenario, and the degree of standard and control that you want to exercise, and finally with what resources are available at your end. So in a nutshell, we can say qualitative research is a sequence of decisions that a researcher is making. So yesterday I spoke about case study. If you want to conduct a case study, your research design involves precise discussion or reconstruction of a case. Here we identify case may be related to an individual, or case may be related to an institution's functioning, or maybe a particular destination's performance. So a concrete discussion and detailing of the issues or the problems and the interventions are necessary to be mentioned or described in the study. So here in the second point you can see, here we have persons in the study, or the communities that you are working on, or the organizations or institutions. These are the unit of analysis which we can say in a case study. Normally we use purposive sampling in almost all qualitative researches. The advantage of purposive sampling is you can achieve your research objectives by identifying the right respondent. Data may be collected through interview forms. Normally data is collected either by observation or by interviews. So as a researcher, what mechanism is ideal for your research? And the last point here is analysis that could be using hermeneutics, which last day we have seen. You identify the codes, interpret it, and that interpretation is reflecting the developments or involvements. So let us take a case study in our context, tourism and hospitality management context. Do you remember last day I spoke on the tourism organizations, taking example of Jammu and Kashmir and Himachal Pradesh? Say for example, tourist movements are very high during the summers to hill stations. So we have hotels operated by JKTDC or HPTDC. So predicting next 5 years how these destinations experience tourist movements, what involvement HPTDC or JKTDC can have to facilitate tourists, and what is their past experience in the last 5 years, how hotels in popular hill stations, their occupancy rate or the demand and price. So while we analyze this, we can either compare the results of two institutions or exclusively work upon one institution based upon that particular context. Here the disadvantage of case study is generalization. See, if we study Jammu and Kashmir, that scenario may not apply in Rajasthan or Gujarat. The second research design that applies to comparative studies. Here we take two or more cases to compare. So here cases, I have mentioned an example of traditional festivals celebrated in two different locations. How we can compare this festival environment in terms of participatory role of local people. In India, we have several festivals. Some are religious, some are non-religious. So let us take some festivals which are religious in nature. For example, Diwali. Diwali is celebrated with a lot of enthusiasm. And when we take different locations in India, the celebration pattern would be slightly different. In my personal experience, if you take Tamil Nadu, people celebrate Diwali with cleaning the houses, busting the crackers, or buying new utensils for their home. And when I take the same case in Uttar Pradesh, the same thing is happening. The cleaning process as usually happens in home. Then there is a day called Dhanteras where we buy utensils for the home, and on the day of Diwali, people wear new dresses, do puja at home, burst crackers, then exchange sweets. Now let me take Assam in the context. It is slightly different the way Diwali is celebrated there. Lighting of lamp, diya, that is a common thing. But they also light lamp and place it on the pond they have, the water bodies nearby. It's quite interesting to look at the way the people in Assam celebrate Diwali. Why? Because rather than busting the crackers or making rangolis, the light play an important role, natural light. So when we take India, pan-India, traditional festivals, the involvement of people, it's same. But the way it is celebrated slightly change. And the outcome when we study, there is a harmony, or you can say an attachment with the family members or the communities living nearby, that we can find. So one disadvantage of comparative study is identifying the correct dimensions to compare, or how does this design fit into the research process. These two things are very important. So identifying the dimensions, for example, festival is concerned. If we take Diwali, there are certain things which we can say the work done at home. Almost all states, people who celebrate Diwali, the similar process is happening. And how they use light, diya, whether it is the whole house is decorated, or as I said in Assam, the pond or the water bodies, they light diyas. So then comes the distribution, the way people are enjoying the celebration, whether distributing of sweets or busting of crackers. So we can identify dimensions. Some dimensions you may find it easy to work, but some dimensions you may find difficult. So a homogeneous pattern is required for identifying such dimensions. There are two more research designs which I wish to present here. Retrospective studies. Retrospective studies identifies the past developments. For example, biographic research. The selection of informants play a very important role here. You might remember life history, whom you have to identify. If you want to do a biographic research, the contribution of that individual. And in terms of your research, how meaningful it will be. Let me take the example of tourism and hospitality industry again. I would like to mention few personalities who contributed immensely to tourism industry. Mohan Singh Oberoi, the person who is behind the Oberoi group. Tata, IHCL, you must have heard the company name, Tata Group of Hotels, established by the Tatas, and Inder Sharma, who worked with Sita Travels and later established LPTI. His son Arjun Sharma, the founder of LPTI. When we take biographic studies, we have to identify the persons. Our research, what extent it contribute to developing knowledge, and second thing is the contribution of these personalities and how it makes meaning overall. Constructionist approach is best way to collect data for retrospective studies. Now let us look into longitudinal studies. You might have heard about two types of researches. One is cross-sectional and second one is longitudinal. Longitudinal studies involve data collection at different phases from the same kind of respondents. So it is an advantage and also a disadvantage at times. You can take a research area and observe the participants, conduct interviews, and this process repeats at different phases. So this will show you, the results will show you what actual changes happen in an area. So longitudinal studies is highly helpful to describe changes happening in a locality and whether it is related to tourism development or any other social changes. So the task for the researcher is they should collect the data repeatedly. Let me take an example from tourism industry again. We know the changes happening in the rural areas. There are a lot of changes we have seen. Urbanization is entering into even rural areas. But have you seen how tourism is coming into rural areas? Take the example of any state, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, etc. In the last 10 years, what changes happened in these states due to tourism? So if you observe minutely, or the people who live there, they can explain you, it was like this before and it is like this now. So longitudinal studies help the researcher to identify and track the changes happening in an area time to time. Snapshot study is another research design in which you focus upon the current state of affairs. So most of the researches we find is snapshot study. It is also called cross-sectional. This will give you immediate result, but there is a question, there is a disadvantage that whether your research question can it be adequately addressed. So the researcher always get confused between what kind of design would be ideal, a snapshot study or a longitudinal study. It depends upon the resources available and the research goal, as I said earlier. Let us quickly go through the contributions of qualitative inquiry. I quote MQ pattern. According to pattern, qualitative research contributes in meaning making, how human beings construct meanings and how they attach it to their experiences. This is number one contribution. Number two, how things work. A qualitative research can easily identify how things work, how human phenomena unfold, and then third point is the consequences of certain phenomena or issues in people's life, so that you can understand the functioning of systems, because qualitative research gathers information systematically and you can understand how it impacts the life. Qualitative research helps us to understand the context better because it is sensitive towards the context. It captures stories and these stories will give you different perspectives, and these perspectives you will realize how people create the reality. Then it identify consequences, intended or unintended consequences. It identify patterns, and these patterns will show you a kind of easy way to make comparison or similarities and differences. To conclude, we have seen in the first part different research designs suggested by U. Flick, and we have seen the advantages and disadvantages. And in the last part, we have seen the contribution of qualitative researches. So, to summarize, for a researcher is concerned, the major issue is the research goals. I once again underline, for an undergraduate student is concerned, he or she has to submit the project or dissertation quickly, and the time and resources available have to use wisely. And for a PhD scholar is concerned, they have to complete the dissertation in a logical and meticulous manner. So, they have to involve more and conduct the study in a deeper way. And now look at the way you organize the study. It would be longitudinal or cross-sectional, or then identifying the context and its importance, because qualitative researches we have seen is context centric. It is highly sensitive to the context. The final aspect is generalizing the results, whether your results could be comparable with other studies or it could be replicable in other context. Different designs which we have discussed is comparative studies, retrospective studies, longitudinal, snapshot studies. So, these are the research designs a qualitative researcher can follow according to U. Flick. And the last part, we have seen the contributions and focus area of qualitative research. I hope you gained some insights on the qualitative research design, and also now realize qualitative researches are highly used in academic communities, and being a researcher, we can also look upon the way qualitative researches can be conducted in our specific area of interest. With this, I conclude this session. If you have any queries, let me know. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.